Let me begin by dispelling the claim that Mr. Gates just made. This has been one of the most productive Congresses in modern history. We've passed nearly 400 pieces of legislation that respond to the urgent priorities of the American people, driving down health care costs, raising wages for the American worker, responding to gun violence, providing equal pay for equal work, responding to the climate crisis. 275 of those bills are fully bipartisan, and 80% of those bills are sitting on the Senate Majority Leader's desk awaiting action. So we will continue to deliver on the important priorities of the American people, but we were also elected to hold this president accountable. And we took an oath of office that said to protect and defend the Constitution, and that's what we're engaged in today. And so I want to return, Mr. Goldman, to the military aid. Did the investigating committees receive evidence about why the United States military aid to Ukraine was necessary? What was it advancing? Because a lot of Americans who are watching don't know a lot about Ukraine, don't know about the geopolitical significance. Like, why does it matter?
The witnesses were quite clear about this, and they say it mattered for multiple reasons. The first is that Russia invaded Ukraine to take over part of their country, and that this was the first military incursion in Europe since World War II. And this is Russia, who's an adversary, actually trying to encroach on another democracy. So just from a broad democratic viewpoint, it was essential not only to Ukraine's national security, but to America's national security to make sure that democracy remains worldwide.
And prior to the call on July 25th, Congress had approved the aid, correct?
Congress had approved the aid, and then the president had held the aid.
And the Defense Department had even publicly announced its intention to deliver the aid, correct?
That's right.
The Trump administration had already certified that Ukraine had taken substantial steps to combat corruption, correct?
Correct.
And that normally leads to the release of the aid.
They announced the release of the aid, yes.
And the investigative committees questioned witnesses from the Defense Department, the State Department, OMB, the White House, and the National Security Council about the president's decision to withhold aid, correct?
Correct.
And I'd like to play a clip of some of that evidence.
From what you witnessed, did anybody in the national security community support withholding the assistance?
No.
I never heard anyone advocate for holding the aid.
And the entire interagency supported the continuation of the security assistance, isn't that right?
That is correct.
I and others sat in astonishment. The Ukrainians were fighting Russians and counted on not only the training and weapons, but also the assurance of U.S. support.
Am I correct that the witnesses that appeared before your committee confirmed that there was no credible explanation for withholding the military aid, and that it was in fact against our national security interest to do so?
Everyone agreed it was against our national security interest to do so. The only explanation that any witness provided was Mr. Sandy, who said that he had heard from Rob Blair, I believe, the assistant to Mick Mulvaney, that the reason was because of other countries' donations or contributions to Ukraine. But that was only in September, and of course there were no further commitments from any other country.
And as we heard from Bill Taylor, who's a graduate of West Point and a decorated combat veteran who served in Vietnam, Ukraine then and now is in an active war with the Russians. Russia stole part of their country in Crimea and has killed more than 10,000 Ukrainians, and weakening Ukraine would only benefit Russia. Here's what Ambassador Taylor said.
After our meeting with President Zelensky, Ambassador Volker and I traveled to the front line in northern Donbass to receive a briefing from the commander of the forces on the line of contact. Arriving for the briefing in the military headquarters, the commander thanked us for the security assistance. But I was aware that this assistance was on hold, which made me uncomfortable. Ambassador Volker and I could see the armed and hostile Russian-led forces on the other side of the damaged bridge across the line of contact. Russian-led forces continue to kill Ukrainians in the war, 1 or 2 a week. More Ukrainians would undoubtedly die without the U.S. assistance.
Against the consensus of his own agencies and national security experts, the president used congressionally appropriated funds to advance his own political interests at the expense of our national security. This action is a threat to the integrity of our elections and the sanctity of our democracy. President Trump must not get away with this. No one in this country, no one, including the President of the United States, is above the law. And with that, I yield back.